Hey everyone, welcome to Esports One's coverage of the World Championships 2019. I'm joined today by Brendan Schilling, an experienced LCS analyst who's worked with a variety of different teams. Thanks for coming on, Brendan.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm Tim Sevenhuysen. I'm the head of data science for Esports One and the founder of Oracle'sElixir.com. Really excited to talk through Worlds. We've done all the previewing. We've covered all kinds of different expectations and predictions. Brendan actually participated in a post we did on Oracle's Elixir, kind of predicting a bunch of different things about what we thought might happen during the tournament. But we've actually had a couple of days of games now in the play-in stage, which is, things actually hit the road and get running. So we just want to go through what's been happening the first couple of days, kind of where our expectations maybe are falling. Are some teams looking better or worse than we expected? What have been kind of the highlight games? So we'll look forward to kind of answering any questions people have in chat while we're doing this live as well. So feel free to chime in at any point. So let's just get started going through the groups, I guess, somewhat in order. It's convenient that we're based in North America. Group A happens to have Clutch Gaming in it, so good place to start, I think, as good a place as any. And it also is a place where there's a lot to talk about because Clutch came out. They dropped that first game to Unicorns of Love, had to come back and win their second game. It's not quite the opening that you might hope for from the seed coming in here and wanting to come out really strong and look really good. Dropping in game to the Unicorns. Was this a surprise to you? Was it something that you think is really a concern going forward, or is it just, hey, any single game can go either way?
So for that game, it seemed like a little bit of a concern at first, seeing that they would actually drop a game in the first place in group stage because of how consistent their strategy is every single game. As we know, in playoffs in the Gauntlet, like they did the same thing almost every single time, and it worked most of the time. So I would assume that with so many games under their belt with that strategy, that they would know, like, oh, these are the problems that can occur if we fail the Herald play or something. They made that mistake in the UOL game. They had Huni int, and because he chased for a kill on Aha, and he died. And so at that point, the Herald play is kind of like, all right, maybe we shouldn't be committing to this now. But right after that, they have Huni push out bot, and he rotates from bot all the way to Herald. But by then, Unicorns of Love had their top laner boss push out bot wave, and he started taking plates. Even their mid laner rotated away from Herald to get mid plates, and suddenly they gave away, like, I don't know, I almost want to say over 1,000 gold, and you couldn't even get plates with Herald because it was post 14 minutes because they were so concerned for that Herald play.
So but then how much of the case do you think in this game with Clutch and Unicorns, how much of it was Clutch, doing the same thing over and over again, but just failing to execute this time? And how much of it was, do you think, Unicorns coming in and seeing, hey, they always do this thing, and here's our plan on how to beat it?
So Unicorns definitely knew that it was going to happen. But unfortunately, Clutch were there first, which happened often in LCS, and even TL made that mistake, and Clutch won the fight. And they did the same thing versus Mammoth, and they won the fight. Like, it worked both times, technically, assuming Huni didn't die. And yet against the Unicorns, because of that one mistake by Huni, suddenly they felt like, oh, we need to do it again, when they really didn't have to.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to always discuss, especially with that kind of that classic 10-minute Herald rotation that we're kind of talking about in the ways that plays out. To what extent do you think that Herald rotation, that Herald play, was really the decisive part of the game, or do you feel that's just one that we tend to fall into discussing because it's kind of the Clutch analytical meme is the Herald fight, right? The Herald rotation.
I think honestly, every team knows about it when it comes to Clutch, but it's really understanding how did they get there in the first place? How does this even happen? So with the Mammoth game, because it really showcases Clutch executing it well. They had Tristana Elise topside versus I think a Karma Nocturne, and naturally, and that was their only lane that would actually do anything in the early game. So naturally, they go and try to pressure the dive once, and they go 1-for-1, whatever. But instead of pushing that part of it, they go towards bot to assist their bot lane, get bot river vision, DeMonte won Orianna versus Azir, which I don't think that's how it's supposed to go, but he had priority on his own from it through his own skills. And they did that to ensure that their bot lane could get a reset for the Herald play. Meanwhile, Mammoth, that never connected to them. They kept trying to look to defend top the entire time, and suddenly Clutch just gets the free bot reset they wanted, and they get their free Herald play. Mm-hmm. So if I was like, for instance, if I was Mammoth, I'd be thinking, okay, well, if he's going to do this time, we probably should be prepared for, okay, he's going to go towards bot side. He's not just going to constantly gank or dive top lane. And suddenly, like, you might be able to fix this, like, Herald problem a little bit. But they have to do that first, right? Like, they have to figure out what do we have to do before it, not after it.
Yeah. I think, like, to step back a little bit on it, we actually just posted a breakdown of the Unicorns Love Clutch game, written by Brendan McGee, who was their former head coach. And he broke it down. He really went a lot into, what happened outside of that kind of the execution of that kind of mid-game portion, the end of laning phase and the rotation and all that. And he really looked a lot at the draft. And his point was really that Unicorns drafted a whole lot of lane priority. They drafted a lot of early game focus. And they used that to kind of put Clutch in uncomfortable positions and maybe kind of attack kind of that pattern that they like to play through. Is the draft something that stood out to you? Obviously we had a bit of an unusual composition with the Nico, the Rexa, and then the mid Tristana, the bot lane Heimerdinger, all of that. How influential do you think that was on the way the game played out?
I mean, the draft definitely affected it a little bit, right? Because they were playing Renekton and Echo, who wanted dash in, and they were playing Heimerdinger, they were playing Nico, like champions that are good at funneling you into them and then bursting you down, like locking you down, which did happen later on. But one problem that occurred, like just on the strategic level, was UL forced a split map, and we saw Lyra taking the blue buff, like, just like normal, like he's on the bot side. He could have just committed to taking all the camps on that side and even looking for an early dive on the bot tower, because Heimerdinger blue flash level 1 to Cody and Vulcan. But instead, they rotated up towards top side where Aha was and where their portion, like their strength side is. And he gets his pushed off from the top scuttle. And then he tries to make a bot play to like relieve pressure, but he can't stop it. He can't get his bot lane to reset. So suddenly Lyra has... Oh, and before that, he went mid to relieve mid, give him like the push. So he had 3 plays that really didn't net his team anything or help his team get to the point of where they want to be for Herald. And I'm pretty sure, like, looking at draft again, there's definitely things you can fix there. But if they actually committed to a bot dive, I mean, suddenly, like, Heimerdinger's dead, your dual lane's really ahead, and they were like, I think they were up like 20 CS regardless, and they would have been snowballing a lot harder in that game than whatever they committed to in whatever they did in the game, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think my take on the game overall in that first game was really that Clutch did, despite the draft that heavily kind of countered things that they wanted to do, and was just, a little hard to react, or to, like, not something you expect, right? And despite some of those things that went wrong, Clutch did have the control of the game. They did have the pace and the tempo of the game. Other than, like Lyra was he was kind of falling behind, but Clutch had the clearer, I think, plan of what they wanted to do and how they were going to set up. Like, this is going to lead to this, is going to lead to this, and execution really failed a lot for them. Specifically in those first like 7-8 minutes where they kind of had. They had a good idea of, like, for example, Vulcan rotating to the mid lane, and he and Lee are going to make a play. Like, they were coordinating stuff like this, but then they just failed to execute and actually gain something from it. And then you get to that Herald play, and again, like you mentioned earlier, they were the first ones there. They were in position better. They had actually kind of won the rotation from that perspective, but they didn't manage to secure the kill in the fight. They didn't layer their CC or kind of like get to the targets with enough coordination, and then they overchased trying to fix it and kind of like threw it away. So that kind of thing, losing a game that way, when it's like, it's not like they beat you, they beat you to the punch, they had a better plan, they executed better, and off you go. That feels bad. But when you're the ones who have the control of the game, you're the ones who have the clearer plan, and then you just make mistakes and kind of throw it away. I think that's a lot easier to fix, and that's a lot easier to recover from. And so it leads into the next game they had. They played against Mammoth. This one I think was a lot more straightforward when they took the win this time. And Huni popped off, and and off we go. Is there as much to take away from this one, or is this more just this is what we expected from Clutch, and there it is, and we move on?
I think it just shows that they realized the mistakes they made in the first game, and they made sure they didn't screw up the Herald play and all the things that led up to it, and they had full control of that game the entire time. Like it was a bit slow, but they were just, we're gonna move in together for vision. Nocturne's never gonna be able to make a solo play on anyone, and anytime someone's in the jungle, we're just gonna kill them. And it was very simple, but there was really not many mistakes in doing it.
Yeah, and I mean the Nocturne itself, I felt when I saw that pick into that composition, or like with the composition surrounding it, I just thought, boy, that doesn't fit at all. What the Nocturne wants to do does not fit what the rest of his team wants to do here. So those are the kinds of things that I think you tend to see a little more often from from the minor regions. Is you get these team compositions that might not make as much sense. And then it becomes, well, since they have a Nocturne who doesn't have like a spread out map where he can, kind of stretch the enemy team and then go and outnumber somewhere, like, well, as long as we kind of stay grouped and rotate well and apply pressure in multiple locations when we do kind of spread out, then it's a pretty straightforward formula to beat the weakness in this composition. And I thought that was a pretty influential part of that game as well.
Yeah, the Nocturne was definitely I didn't really understand when they first took it, because I assumed that they were going to look for something that would help stop what Elise wants to do. And Nocturne's not really necessarily that kind of pick. And because he spent so much time trying to go towards top, defend it. Like he didn't get any. His level 6 was like delayed, and by then like his Clutch is already doing what they want to do.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that great.
And I mean, it wasn't a game that was without mistakes from Clutch. You mentioned how slow they are playing it, which in general I don't really have an issue with teams kind of playing slow, as long as low kills is not bad. Slow can be bad if you need to be pushing the pace and applying pressure and actually increasing your lead. But there's a difference between slow and not killing people. And I didn't have a huge issue with kind of their macro and the way they went out from there. But, there were, the very first kind of play of the game, I think more or less the first one, the top lane kind of tower dive where Hootie and Lyra they forced it pretty hard. And Hootie died for first blood, and then Lyra had to kill Fudge after. Like, there was things like that where like, there's still something going on here that they're, I don't know if it's, sometimes that can feel like overconfidence, especially in that kind of situation. Like, we're just better, so we'll just make this play and we'll beat them. And if it doesn't work out, we'll beat them on the next one. Like, those kinds of things make me feel a little uncomfortable. But, there are other teams that we might have that impression on in later groups that we talk about. But outside of that, that one, the game against Mammoth was, a little more straightforward overall for sure. Speaking of straightforward wins, if we... we're not going to go through every single game here. If we jump ahead and look into Group B, Splice looked okay, I guess. they handled it just fine. The notes I have on their games are a lot shorter than the notes I have on Clutch's games. There's just not as much to say. The fun fact, I actually tweeted this out earlier today. So Splice averaged, what was it, like around 5,500 gold advantage at 15 minutes. When you plug that into the early game rating,
it's really high
metric. Yeah, it's like a 96% chance to win as of that point, based on like the state of the game on their gold and dragons and so on. You're not supposed to enter the mid game with a 96% chance to win, but they did. So, Splice, yeah, they're doing all right. What do you think has been the most decisive piece for them?
I think the most interesting thing that they were doing in these two games was the amount of like pulling around the enemy jungler with pressure they have in their lanes. Like really in the ISG game, the like humanoid on LeBlanc.
Mm.
Like he was basically in their face against Lissandra Lee Sin all the time, trying to pull Lee there. And then when Lee shows up, then they look for a bot dive. Like, was it Vizicachi was pushing top 24/7. He gained a big CS lead, even though I think he died like once early on. And their bots perma pushing. So their Adi, the was it? Yeah, Adi ISG jungler.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know what to do. Like he didn't know where to go. Like what is his plan? And that's because Splyce is just pulling him everywhere.
Yeah.
And you look in the DFM game, and they're playing against Nocturne mid, and they're using their split pusher in bot lane in like mid game to bait out Nocturne. Like they're asking him to go bot to like, okay, try to kill him, do it. We'll do Baron right away. So I thought they were playing really well around just pulling the enemy around in their games.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of things there. I mean, one is, I think similar to Clutch, like when people talk about Clutch, almost the first thing anybody will say is, oh, look, they're going to go for Herald at 10 minutes. As if that like defines the entirety of who they are as a team, right? And it's kind of like the soundbite. With Splyce, that soundbite is they're a slow team, right? Oh, they're the late game. They'll make it through the early game and then they'll beat you late with their team fighting or something. I find like, especially when we come to an event like this where the people on broadcast, and it's no real criticism against them, but like you have to cover all these regions and find something useful to say about all of them. And when you come across a team where you know that the accepted narrative of this team is 10-minute Herald plays, or slow team, or their solo laners are really good, and you see that and you're like, yeah, if I say that, nobody's gonna have an issue with me saying that because everybody agrees that's kind of the thing to talk about with them. It becomes really easy to fall into that and not really peel apart the layers and get deeper into who they really are. And then a team like Splyce comes out and does this and generates 5,000 plus gold leads at 15 minutes when everybody's saying they're the slow team. And I enjoy when that happens a little bit, because I think I'm in the luxury of a position where I don't have to put out an opinion on every team, and I kind of avoid like when I don't have a strong opinion on a team where I feel like the accepted narrative is a little shallow. I can just like not say anything and protect myself that way. But it's kind of fun to see kind of those analytical narratives get pulled apart a little bit and see the Splyce is actually, they've got the skill, they've got the tools. Maybe they just weren't in the right environment, or it had to do with the opponents they're playing against, that they brought out these certain strategies. Or also, I mean, sometimes it can just be that the narrative around a team spins up, and then it would take an entire split of playing the opposite to convince people that it actually is the opposite. And maybe they actually do play different than that, and they can play early game and so on. So that, that's my little rant on that front. But more to the point, I think one of the really interesting parts of the Splyce games to me was seeing what Hkaa could do, and not specifically like, hey, Hkaa went out here and he destroyed these games individually, but in both games, attention from Xerxes or some game situation really set him up very early on to succeed. So against Detonation Focused Me, there was a play very early on where Udapon and Gang tried to 2v2 all in very early on. Xerxes came in because he was already planning, like he was already in the location to kind of gank for it. He comes around and they get first blood. They punish the all in. And against Isurus, there was a similar, I think, early play. I don't remember if it was an actual skirmish or if it was more just general like jungle presence and pressure to give him the opening. But I believe Hkaa got kind of helped out a little and kind of pushed forward a little bit. And it was really good to see. Partly that it was circumstantial, but also that there was intentionality around, like, let's set Hkaa up to carry this game, and we know how to do it, and here's it is. And then they give us the opening, we were ready for it, and off we go, and snowball it forward.
Yeah, they, I think one of my favorite things when it comes to Worlds is that a lot of the teams become more early game focused because of how they realize that how confident they can be in their matchup knowledge, that, oh, we can definitely do this. Like, we can definitely succeed in making this play. Like, we would compliment G2 doing this all the time, right? With how Jankos reads the map. And you look at this and it's, you gain like, okay, it looks like they're doing this more and more. And Xerxes, of course, is a great jungler. He's one of the best junglers in LEC. And he made those reads in those two games. Like, he just outperformed against the other jungler and got his mid and bot ahead, while Vizicachi's just doing his normal thing top lane, and which so happened to be winning top lane, which is particularly good as well.
Yeah.
And suddenly they just have this whole open map for them to just play with. And I think the Hecarim was a very interesting pick, because I don't know how many teams are actually going to even pick up Hecarim.
Yeah.
But the fact that he can get from point A to point B very quickly and punish anyone that's extending like he did in that game, it's pretty useful. It makes you think of like how Lyra would play Skarner.
Sure. Yeah. So for the rest of this group, because, one of these teams, assuming that Splice doesn't totally blow up and drop their next 2 games or something, one of these teams is going to be fighting with, fighting for kind of the second place to come out of the group, out of Group B. So we saw Isurus took down DFM in the other game. Did you kind of have any expectation coming into this group of which team would kind of be more likely to come into second place? Like, did you feel Isurus was the stronger team, or is this one where, kind of coming in fresh?
I didn't watch most of these play-in teams before Worlds, but I did look at the comps that they would like build around from like their match history, and DFM had the most wide variance of like stuff they were trying out, while not being in necessarily a strong region, which made me think that, okay, well, they might not actually have like a clear plan of what they want to do. And in the 2 games that they played so far, their comps were a little weird and little lost on exactly what they want to do. Whereas ISG, again, not like exactly a strong region, but they definitely had an idea of what they wanted to do in their games based on those comps. And we saw that in their game versus DFM.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely thought DFM was not going to make it, and I thought ISG would make it just from that alone.
Sure.
And in the actual game, in the actual games, against Splice, they got murdered. Like Adi didn't know what he wanted to do, but against DFM, they had, how would I say it? They were able to get Adi was able to read steal twice to kill him to get his bot ahead. It's just I would say their mid game decision making is a little slow right now, because they could have ended the game much sooner before Kale became like more of a problem with Ezreal's range. Because if anyone's played Kale, she with her low range, and you face someone who outranges you, you feel really useless. And Ezreal was way ahead, and it took them till 32 minutes to actually realize this aspect, and then they finished the game. So if I'm DFM, like, I hope that somehow that they screw up in mid game, in which they can delay the game and maybe pick scaling pieces to try to beat them out. But besides that point, I feel like ISG are probably locked for second.
Yeah, I mean, I thought DFM kind of lacked some of the tools they needed to play the longer game. They didn't have as much of like the proactivity or they had Rakan. Obviously, Rakan can engage well, but he needs to have good follow up, or he's just gonna he goes in and dies, right, and then nothing happens. They kind of lacked some of the things I thought they needed to. You can scale with damage, but if you never get a situation where you can apply that damage safely, then it's not going to work. And Isurus had this kind of not the opposite problem, but they had a lot of the kind of the proactive tools where you could go in and start a skirmish, start a fight, but their damage, like their carries, are more like sustained damage carries. So I felt like that to me was a bit of the issue with their mid game, is suddenly they weren't sure what to do. Like, are we going for picks, but our carries aren't really set up for getting picks? Are we looking for team fights where we can like control the zone and then and play out the fight with sustained damage? And I felt like they got a little confused that way, but it definitely felt to me like Isurus had more of a plan on their macro, how to control the map, how to use all the lanes. And that's really what eventually won it out for them, is that they stalled out, but they weren't giving the enemy team kind of options to force into them. Isurus kept trying to make things happen. They kept trying to create plays. They kept controlling the map, and eventually it was gonna, they were putting themselves in a position to succeed. They just had to find enough of the right opportunities and get enough mistakes from the enemy for it to actually work out. So I think, if I'm Dead FM thinking about the next game between these two, I'm definitely drafting a little bit differently. Like you said, whether it's scaling, but scaling that can be applied properly. I think they should feel good about the kind of the counter punching they did when Isrus kept trying to make plays into them, and Dead FM were able to kind of turn the plays around with just their positional play or the toolkit they had in their comp. I think they can try to do a little more of that, but they need to be able to take control of the game themselves and not just always be reacting.
Yeah, definitely. Also, just having a few tools for proper engage, because like you said, like you have Rakan, but he's paired up with an Echo Jungle who also can't really necessarily just dive on his own without. I took some damage, guys. I'm gonna R out, so you're on your own.
I mean, there are diving champions like dive the backline champions, but there are dive the backline and get out champions, and there are dive the backline and stay there and kill you before you can kill me because I'm like a bruiser kind of thing. Both Rakan and Echo are the go in and then somebody else do something to finish this off. Like, so.
Yeah, and speaking of Echo, I found it interesting that the first day we had a bunch of Echo, right? Mm-hmm. And today we didn't. In fact, we saw more teams picking Gragas over Echo today.
Yeah, it's true. So
I'm curious, as I don't think Gragas changed at all. I think his nerf was just some of his max HP percentage damage on his W, which does not affect him. Yeah. And either these teams realize that he's not that nerf, we're gonna pick him, or it's a combination of Echo's 0-4. maybe this is not actually gonna work for us right now.
Yeah. Well, and I'm looking back to the drafts to see because there were Gragas bans today as well, not only picks but also bans. I'm checking whether we actually saw him show up in the bans yesterday, but not really.
No, that was one thing I noticed. Was where's the Gragas? He's kind of missing in this group right now.
Yeah. So I mean, sometimes that can be just pocket metas, right? Like which teams are scrimming against each other. But you'd expect those to go cross group, right? If you consider that all 12 of these teams are scrimming each other in some fashion, and they'll be scrimming outside of those 12 as well, but you'd expect Group A and Group C might be scrimming each other, so you'd get them across the days or something. So it is a little weird. Pivoting that hard from literally one day in between is something you wouldn't really expect, but yeah, I think that'll be interesting to see for the next 2 days whether the Echo kind of comes back. Maybe they just need to figure out how to apply it differently, or whether it is actually something where this is a day one thing and then never mind.
Yeah.
But speaking about the games today, so I think one of the really big storylines for the play-ins in general is Damwon Gaming. What are they going to do? I think it's the first time ever we've had a Korean team in the play-in stage. And how are they going to look? Are they going to just crush this thing and run away with it and potentially make a run all the way to the semifinals or better at the end of the day? How is this team going to look? And some of the early kind of feedback I've seen after today, we've had some headlines about, it wasn't all perfect, but they still looked really good and crushed it. What was your impression? Because, to throw mine in there, I thought they actually looked pretty, I mean, they won, and they won pretty convincing, but they weren't, I'd emphasize a little more on the it wasn't that clean front.
I actually thought they looked as I expected. Maybe Bot doing a bit worse than I expected, because when you look at Damwon, you say, okay, it's the solo lanes and jungler, right? And Bot knows what they are. They're not going to try to win lane, or at least they shouldn't, because they're not that great. They wait for mid jungle to help them out. But in the first game that they played today, they had LeBlanc Lee Sin. They played really well around it. Top, that was where Vlad, LeBlanc were running Klepto. They had a ton of gold. I think Hkaa tweeted that they had 400 plus at least on Klepto each. And the game's already won. At that point, when you have both those lanes crushing lane and your bot lane's not losing with Kai'Sa, game's done. Their bot lane tries to win. I don't know why. They're trying to do this. They lost the Alistar and they play Leona, but you don't have to win 2v2 as Leo still. But they tried to win, so that was bad, and that gave Royal a free lead in bot, which caused some issues. And we could actually see in well, I'll say that they did the traditional, like, okay, we're gonna take bot, we're gonna swap them up, get Herald, and give plates to Nuclear to give him like gold back. Which
Yeah.
again, that's something common that Damwon does. But another common thing they do is they leave side laners unattended, and we actually could see like Closer solo killing Showmaker in the side lane, and it starts pulling Damwon towards them. And then suddenly Silas, I can't remember the mid laner's name, but the mid laner playing Silas suddenly gets to starts catching up in farm in the side lane. Now, unfortunately, in that game they have Vlad, who's like very strong scaler, and the game was doomed no matter what, even with that situation. But it showed that the problems they had and the weaknesses they have can be applied still, and it occurs, I think, in the other game they play as well, against Flamingo, even because Flamingo attacked Nuguri on Rise, and then they created a team fight against Nuguri in Rise that was actually advantageous to them. So I'm happy that Damwon is focusing on mid jungle because that is their strongest aspect.
Yeah.
I'm not happy that the problems, the weaknesses they had going into this tournament are actually appearing already in 2 games against Flamingo and Royal.
Yeah, and I think like this is actually something that I've noticed very consistently with Korean teams at international events when they play against teams that they are very confident are worse than they are. And it's not that they're wrong, but they come in and you definitely get a feeling of arrogance, like, we're just going to execute this. And we kind of had this, like I mentioned it briefly before with Huni and Lyra and what they did. Coincidentally, perhaps, both Korean players. But there's definitely let's just go out and stomp them, right? And they loosen up, and yeah, they end up winning. And it's usually pretty convincing. And by the end of the day, you're like, oh yeah, they stomped them. But you get all these little things where it's like, you could have taken the small win and moved on, and then you add up 6 of those small wins and the game's over. Or you could try for the big win, look really impressive, and it fails, and now suddenly you're even, 12, 15 minutes in the game, the gold's even, and, it doesn't really look like you're going to lose, but you also haven't won the game yet. So, this is a pattern that I've been kind of personally tracking for several years with the Korean teams, and it's, they are playing against teams that they're much better than, so it doesn't really end up hurting them, but it's just an attitude or a perspective on the game that I don't really love.
And it's funny because IG is kind of like that in a way, like just taking situations for granted when they really don't have to. And Damwon does the same. And what both teams do have though is spectacular players, right?
Yeah.
Except for in Damwon's case, Nuclear is not actually like that. He's not at the same level, of course, to his solo laners. But like he'll do his job regardless. He's not like a Jackie Love or something. But they for some odd reason take these fights that aren't needed, or they don't protect a carry when they're pushing out a wave because, well, he's gonna outplay them. If it's gonna happen, he's just gonna outplay them. Like, you can't depend on that always. Sometimes you do have to depend on it, but when you have a good enough lead, probably don't have to.
Yeah, and it's the classic thing with, and one of the comments people make on IG coming into this tournament, and it was similar last year's, when you have so much skill, and you can play with such like a kind of walking the knife's edge, like, I'm going to try something, and if it works, it's really going to work, and if it fails, there's a higher chance of it failing. You can do that when you have these really skilled players, and it raises your ceiling so high, but it also, lowers your floor. It just creates this high variance in how your team can perform, and that can carry you literally all the way to a world championship. And this is kind of the discussion people have been having around Damwon coming into this tournament. Hey, their ceiling is high enough to literally win the world championship, but where's their floor at? And I think this is obviously way too early to, roll that narrative out and say, there it is, like, we're seeing they've got a floor and a ceiling. But there's a little bit of it there, right? There's a hint of it, and I think it's just, it's very easy to kind of look at that when you've got high skilled players, as opposed to, a well put together macro team that's gonna, take control and strangle it out kind of thing. It's more the Chinese style, more the high skill style, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's been a little bit of that in Damwon, but we also just saw there were things from both the teams they played against where, just basic mistakes, things that they would do about Shrimp's pathing his opportunity very early on against M1 to join a bot lane play. They were crashing a wave, and he could have come in here and threatened the dive, pushed them off the tower, whatever else. But he goes and hovers mid instead, and it achieves nothing. Things like that, like little plays that you just notice, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, this team's not quite at the same level. They're not communicating as well. They don't recognize or read the map as well. So it's the result definitely wasn't surprising for this team, but I think we're going to need to see a lot more. And I think, honestly, if Damwon plays out the rest of the group stage and even their BO5 at this level, I still think it's not going to tell us a whole lot about how they're going to do in the next phase of the tournament. But, it would be nice to see them absolutely crush it and not make mistakes. And then, I think that builds a lot more hype. So,
yeah, and about the Flamingo game, they drafted Caitlyn, which was something I figured would be something teams would even do against Damwon, because again, their bot lane collapses under pressure a bit, and it would pull Showmaker to bot lane to help them out way more, and then you can use that as an advantage, a pressure point, to actually try to swing the game a little bit more in your favor and get deal with how good Showmaker is in lane, right? But they didn't do that, right? they barely, the Caitlyn didn't get a single plate in that game. So
yeah, I don't think so.
I find it interesting that both these play-in teams had some general good idea on how they want to draft versus Damwon and target weaknesses. It's just they don't have the execution, right? They just don't have enough yet.
Yeah.
And if Damwon lands in Group D, assuming they get out, that is a much bigger task.
Yeah, I would love to see that in terms of just the level of play and how that's going to work out. I think that group would be very interesting, but we'll see. The way that plays out is going to depend somewhat on Group C of the play-in stage as well, with Mega Esports, Loki Esports, Hong Kong Attitude. I'm just going to put it out there. I thought this group, and honestly the entire level of play today on day 2 was lower than day 1. And Group C, I definitely felt myself dragging through some of these games. Was not especially impressed with what I saw from these teams. HKA is the team that, in theory, is supposed to be the favorite. They're coming from the LMS, and historically that's the more well-rounded region. Do you feel that they've kind of taken that place, or are they not clearly better than the other two?
So on one hand, we saw them facing against was their Quinn game was against Mega,
the first, yeah,
and you'd think, wow, they're showing a lot of patience with Quinn and playing around her and poking them off Baron. This is not an easy composition to actually win out with. Mm-hmm. And then you see them play against Loki, and then suddenly they get sucked into all these fights where Loki has their main advantages, and they don't stop. And it keeps getting worse and worse to the point where the game's over, and you're just like, what happened? Just the other game, they were focused on what was good for them, and now suddenly it's just the complete opposite. So I'm curious if they're just a bad team at playing against opponents who really play fast, try to make the game a fast pace of just constant kills, constant looks, and suddenly it's just like, wow, we can't go there. we'll keep making mistakes doing that. So I don't know. I'm kind of lost on what to think of HKA right now.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think we have seen, there are several teams in this stage of the tournament who are playing that fast style, who are out there and hey, we're going to throw the next punch, we're going to throw the next punch after that, and then we're going to throw another one. I think Loki has done a bit of that. I think Isurus has done that. And I think when you're coming from a minor region, that's normally a way that I would kind of advocate. It's better to be in control and the ones doing something rather than being the ones reacting. I think when you are the clearly superior team, then playing a little more reactively and a little more in control and minimizing your chance of kind of risk and mistakes can be the superior way to play. But when you're the underdog, and as a minor region team coming in, I think it's somewhat healthy to have kind of that always we're the underdog team. You want to be out there. You want to be learning how to set the pace, how to control the game, how to be the ones, trying to make something happen. There is a downside to that, and I think we've definitely seen the downside to that from these teams. But it also is definitely, you can make it work. You can win games on that. You can win games against superior opponents that way. So I think we've definitely seen some of that this tournament so far.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna like rag on Loki entirely because, for one, what I hope teams have actually realized by now after these 2 games is probably gonna need to ban Syndra versus them, because their bot Syndra is helping them so much in terms of just kill pressure in the lane, and they're rotating their duo to the mid to affect mid matchups and like try to get these like early 4-man skirmishes.
Yeah. And
since Syndra is such a good pick there right now, that's a pretty big issue. But what's also interesting was I don't see this often by teams necessarily, but when the who were they playing against? Mega. When Mega had the lead in mid game, you normally push the wave and then you enter the enemy's jungle to get vision. Loki's waiting to set an ambush, and they realized that Mega was having one person sit on the wave to push it, and they were entering with the rest of the people without seeing who shows on the wave yet. And it worked 2 times that led to 1 Baron and almost a 2nd Baron.
Yeah.
And I suddenly think to myself, like, oh, well, I mean, these guys aren't just complete, like, oh, we're just going to run at you all the time. Like, they're actively thinking, how can they do something here?
We see a macro mistake from the other team. How can we exploit it? They're not quite painting by the numbers here. So let's go in and outnumber them while they're a little split up. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's not like a situation where you're like, oh, I'm just gonna brute force the 5v5 mid and just take whatever fight happens there. Like, no, we realize we're a bit weaker. Let's try to find a way to like make this into our favor. So I don't know. I'm getting a feeling that they might be the one who gets on top for this group.
Yeah, that could. I mean, every team has won 1 so far, so it's going to be decided with the next one. Maybe we'll have a tiebreaker. We'll see how it is. But I think, compared to Group A, where we also have all 3 teams are 1-1, I think it's still pretty clear to me, at least, that Clutch should be the superior team in that group. That they, that they were the ones who decided more of their own fate against Unicorns. Not to take anything away from Unicorns winning and what they did, but if Clutch had played that out properly, they were the advantaged team. Group C, I think, is definitely feeling a little more wide open, and then we'll, that can create some wild cards going into the best of 5s, and how that can play out. So I want to take a few more minutes here to call back. As I mentioned before, you participated in the article we did with a group of people kind of making predictions about the tournament as a whole, and some of the teams that we talked about, are featured in this play-in. You picked Damwon Gaming as your dark horse pick. A team or a player that is most likely to exceed outside expectations. And here's what you wrote about them. So Damwon enter Worlds with a solo lane focused team and a bot lane who don't give up many kills when not receiving resources. If Damwon can tune up their play around the strong side of the map and continue emphasis on mid jungle picks that synergize, they can make an impression this tournament. Would you write that any differently at this point? Do you feel any different or any more strongly about that pick there?
When looking at Damwon, so the series that they won to get to Worlds was against KZ, and in that series they showed that with their strong mid jungle that they can help their weaker bot lane, so you don't feel as bad when they have bad bot matchups, and that Nuguri is good on regardless if he gets resources or no resources, and you think to yourself, okay, like, so you just have to tune up the mistakes you have where, like, okay, hopefully bot lane doesn't have some random death. We don't get caught in side lane as much. And you fix all these little things, and suddenly Damwon looks actually like a really good team. But then we look at the SKT series, and it's a completely different story. They get 3-0'd. They didn't have a clue what they wanted to do in any of those games. And you look further back, and it seems like they have this constant struggle of, like, what's our identity? What's our identity? Seeing them in these 2 games, they know what their identity is. And that is a really good thing to me. Like, Kaisa is Nuclear's most played and reason she's super good on him, as besides the fact that Kai'Sa's obviously like one of the best ADCs in the game, besides that point, her ulti allows her to dive and join the two big carries on their team, Naguri and Showmaker, and she's very good at positioning because of the abilities she has. You know, she has her Invis when she goes when she gets that evolve, and she has her R to again reposition. Very easy. Same with Xayah, easy to position. Same with Ezreal. He plays these things that help him do better in team fights. And it's, so far, no one's taken Kai'Sa away. And I'm curious what they're going to do, because they've played Xayah Rakan a bit, but that hasn't really been the case in the past series. Like, they haven't really wanted to go that route at all. And I don't know. No teams have contested it in these first two games. And I want to see more on what happens with what will they do when their bot lane gets what will happen when their bot lane gets more contested and they can't get the mid advantage or like the mid jungle movement that they usually do. I'm very curious what they will do in that situation.
So, a couple more things from partly leading out of this predictions article. Your bold prediction was that Clutch Gaming will make it to the knockout stage, by which you mean the quarterfinals or better. You wrote, well, Clutch have very defined strategies. They went through several best of fives to see what works against them. With time to pick up new champions, add more flexibility towards their play, and a best of one format in the group stage, where fallback strategies help greatly against surprise strategies, Clutch have a real shot at getting to the quarterfinals. Does day one change your perspective on them at all? And whether you think that that'll pull out?
So, unfortunately, you know, when you actually think about it, you know, where they would land in their groups if they do make it out of this, it's Group C, right? Against RNG, Fnatic, SKT.
Yeah. You wrote this before the groups are drawn, let's be clear.
Yes. So, on one hand, you know, I do think with the strategies they have, and they have, like, they know their identity, that you can definitely like have a good chance of making it out of groups, because it's all best of ones. Like you can easily like adapt to the meta because you know, oh well, this piece fits in with what we want to do here anyways. So okay, great. But if they make it to Group C, assuming that's a whole different set of teams that they play against, and Demonte's not going to get any kind of like free lead that he normally does.
Yeah.
Like that's just not going to happen. Not again.
Mid laners in that group would be Caps, Faker, and Xiaohu, right? And I'd say the most likely one that he'd get a personal lead against would be Xiaohu. But what's happening on the rest of the map while he does it, right? I think that's the real challenge there.
And RNG specifically is a terrible matchup in some ways for them because, I mean, if we really think about it, they put a ton of resources into bot. Xiaohu just locks mid lane and then plays like a good flank champion or wave clear champion that can help them in team fights and doesn't need a lot of resources. Well, if you're destroying bot lane or putting a ton of resources in the bot lane, how do you unlock your bot lane for the Herald play? You would have to have like a very big top advantage, and Lang is, because of how like there's like Game Goon's like an insane self-sufficient top laner. So Lang's a bit of a self-sufficient top laner as well because again they're so bot heavy. Only downside with Lang compared to like Game Goon is he's pretty susceptible to ganks. Like he doesn't always pay attention to where Karsa is, and I think that's going to be an issue as well. Sure. It would be an issue for RNG in a plan that maybe somehow, let's say like Clutch gets advantage there and then uses TP advantage on bot. Then suddenly, okay, maybe this works out. But that's just all planning like way ahead. Like, oh, this will of course happen. Like I can't be for sure that this would be exactly what happens.
Right. One other thing I kind of want to cover on is that, you know, as we've been talking through a lot of these things, certain aspects of certain topics we've touched on keep bringing one team to mind, and I think it's the team that people are most interested in discussing and talking about and having different opinions on, and that's G2. So some examples, you know, we're talking about the Syndra showing up in the bottom lane, and teams are going to have to ban away the Syndra from some of these teams. Yeah, I mean, Perks in the bottom lane for G2, he was playing Syndra bot before it was cool. You know, that puts me in mind of them. You know, I think teams that have really high skill and can play fast and like assert themselves onto the opponent and maybe have a little bit of higher variance in their games. To me, that describes G2 pretty well. But obviously with a much higher skill level than pretty much any other these other teams we're talking about. You picked G2 in your predictions to win the whole thing. I believe your finals prediction was G2 defeating FPX. I picked G2 as my early exit relative to expectations. Based on what you've seen so far of the meta and any of that, is that one that you're kind of still sticking to? Or do you think there might be something shifting the landscape there?
I'd feel good about it so far. We haven't seen a wide variety of top lane picks right now. A lot of them are more, I would say, good blind picks, which tend to just look to go kind of just be 50-50 in a way, and is better. Well, I shouldn't say 50-50, but are more attuned towards self-sufficient top laners who don't really receive resources or anything. Right. And that makes you think of Gingoon and Impact and players like that. Yeah, more. That Wonder's not necessarily a player like that. He'll play wackier stuff that might not exactly fit the bill. And we look at, I would say there's a rise of AP junglers right now, which I think is very beneficial to G2 because Jankos is a fantastic Elise player. Talia's in the meta, Gragas. We have Echo now. And he's always been very good at picking things up. So, and seeing as how he's, I would say, one of the leads of the team, guides the team in the early game per se, I'm feeling pretty good about how they'll start, at least in the beginning.
So my concern with G2 is largely the high variance kind of issues that I think they can throw away games, but also just that I think there's been a flow to the summer split where obviously they won MSI, and whether you thought that their MSI win was just they were the best team of the tournament flat out, that's all it is, Europe is actually really good, or whether you thought it was the high end of their variance came into play and and they won, they looked really good doing it. Because that's the thing with the high variance team is when they win, they look awesome, but there's the other side of the coin, right? But when they do win, you feel so good about them. And they're like, oh, they totally smashed the other teams. I think I had a little bit of that impression that they won MSI looking amazing and good for them, but there might be another side to this coin. And then you see them kind of in isolation throughout the summer split. Europe only playing Europe. And G2 kind of dodged any revelation of their vulnerability because the games I lost is because they were trolling. Let's be real. They're like, we don't really care. We've won this thing. We've proven we're the best in the league. Let's relax. Let's keep our morale high. Let's play some fun things for the fans. And that means that your losses don't really count against you analytically, which might just be a little bit of a kind of disguise. And they come and they have this really entertaining series against Fnatic, pair of series there. But all of that, makes it hard for me to read. And I think this is why it's such an interesting team, and both them and Fnatic to talk about, is you don't really have this big sample size of, is Europe really this good relative to the rest of the world, because you haven't seen it happen. You saw them against North America and in Rift Rivals, and that tournament, I think, is kind of an analytical wash as well. Not to say that I'm trying to say that North America is just as good as Europe. It doesn't matter that they lost. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying it wasn't a tournament where people came in doing their very best and playing straight to the meta, and there are all these other things about it that make it kind of not really worth discussing too deeply. So I mean, those are all a bunch of factors in why I'm a little skeptical of G2, and I think it's somewhat relative to just the extreme hype level that partly gets applied to them. Am I overreacting or overreaching on those things, do you think, or is there something that you admit might be there?
So obviously when it comes to high variance, the first thing people think is IG, because if you think back at the MSI tournament, IG won almost every groups game, right?
Yeah.
They were it was insane, but they were still taking terrible fights at times, and they were just winning because of just skill, which is obviously not something you really want to depend on always. But with G2, see, like they still have that aspect a bit to them, but the way I like from watching them play, they try to come up with they definitely try to come up with better plans than IG when it comes to like actually like how would you say it? When they're out of like the fun mode, you want to call it?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we're not just gonna go for whatever because it's this. When they actually think about what they want to do, like that team is for sure, like just by far, like one of the best for just terms of creating creativity in and whatever's happening in the map. Like, okay, so they're pushing top. Like we can't deal with this dude. What is our play? And they'll just come up with something right away, and they'll.
I think that speaks to their fundamental knowledge and understanding of the game, which is the hardest thing. And it's also why I think they're a team, from my perspective from the outside, they seem to be pretty lightly coached. Like I think Grabs is pretty hands off. I mean, I think he's there to facilitate and help out, but he's not there saying, "Do this, play this style. I'm going to teach you how to use this macro concept." Like these are all players who deeply fundamentally understand how to play the map, how to have different champions interacting with one another. And I think that's the most impressive thing about them, is that they can be so fluid and so do things so creatively and so different, because on an individual level they have such a freedom and such a depth of understanding of if this pressure point is over here, we can relieve it over there this way, and they're not playing to a notebook of do this, then do this, then do this. They understand why each of those steps would be in place and how they can shift it up a little bit and kind of find kind of the cracks in the armor of those very stable routine ways to play.
Yeah, and they connect the dots pretty quick, right? Like there's the Riot video that they put out like during the Fnatic series about like they did one play and then suddenly disconnected it to like this entire massive lead, and it's just natural to them, right? Like once they get one advantage, like they quickly figure out, okay, we can use this for this, this, and suddenly like that's your game plan. It's just laid out right there, and there's not a lot of teams that do that, because you look at Clutch and it's very much, here it is. This is what we want to do.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. G2, I don't think it's necessarily like, okay, like this is exactly what we want to do every single game. It's more flow. There's like more of a flow to how they play,
and it just requires such a level of comfort and deep understanding of the game, because there's definitely a progression to team kind of quality, right? Like it starts with, do you get the basic concepts of the pro level of play? Then can you put those concepts together in a way that you can recognize what are the conditions? How do I properly recognize the conditions of the situation, right? And then how do I come to the proper conclusion when we've got these 5 circumstances, therefore our next step should be this, this, and this? Can you actually rationally put that through and like ingrain that pattern? And then there's the whole level of progression beyond that, where you don't even have to think about it. You're passively recognizing all these conditions. You're passively recognizing what are the options of where to go next. And it just happens by kind of flow. And I think it's something that in traditional sports, you get a lot of this, like depending on the sport, right? Like football, like American football, for example, there's a lot of, very complex pattern shifting, and you've got people who are very definitively saying, now we're doing this play. So it's not quite the same. But in something like hockey, for example, where it's a very fast flow-based game, you've got to be reacting, you've got to be recognizing all the time, here's where the other 9 players on the ice are, therefore I should be moving here because it's my role to do this and this. And if you have to actively think about it, you're going to get left behind in, about a second and a half. And in League, there's so many more pieces to think about and process that it's really, you have to take teams into this place where they are understanding what are all the pieces, which ones do I need to pay attention to, which ones do I not, what does that translate into for actions. And this is, the job of a coach and what makes it so challenging. To become a good analyst, you also first have to understand what are those pieces. Like, this is why I really like doing the analyst challenges on Oracle's Elixir, is trying to help people recognize, like, you can sit here and have a conversation with your friends, or you can sit here and have like a one-sided conversation with the casters and say, you didn't get that, this is actually the situation, and have that. And you can have all this kind of like, this play just played out, this team won the fight and got the dragon. Yeah, obviously the other team made a mistake. Can you stop in the middle of a game and actually identify what should be happening next? what, do you understand what a win condition is? Do you understand how to apply that? And the team, again, to bring it back, G2's ability to have all of those things going on passively in the back of their minds, and then not having to like say a whole bunch of words out loud to communicate presumably to one another. They can be saying things and just recognizing, here's what we want to do, or this guy wants to do it. That's what's so impressive about them.
Yeah, it's it's why everyone loves them, right? Like it's just something you don't commonly see in teams.
Yeah,
like, very few teams can do what they can do.
So we'll wrap up. If anybody else has any questions they want to throw in the chat, we had a question about Renekton. So he's had an 83% presence in the tournament so far. From Coffee Gurk brought this up. Has been played 6 times, but he's only 1 in 5. What do you think, Loyota, about why teams are picking him? And do you think he's going to go away like the Echo?
Well, one thing nice about Renekton is the fact that, again, we have a lot of AP junglers that actually work really well in the meta. And, of course, pairing him up where he has a literal, I point-click stun on you, and then you set up the burst on him.
Yeah.
And that's just a very easy combo. And you saw Damwon first pick it, and it looked fantastic. But there was a couple of reasons for it. But the first one is that they're just a good Renekton team. Both their players are fantastic, and they play to it. We had the Quinn game, Quinn versus Renekton, and they had who was it again that played it? It was
it was HKA played the
HKA, yeah, HKA, and they had a mid jungle that were set up to make dives on the Quinn and get the Renekton ahead. They didn't do anything for the Renekton at all. He just had to take the beating from Quinn the entire game. So, do I think Renekton's a first pick necessarily? Oh no, he is not that strong in which teams should just be blindly taking him. But if you're a very good Renekton team, it's not that bad. In some cases, it can be good, especially if you know that your opponents don't have picks to deal with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's worth pointing out too that I think at least two of the games were Renektons picked on the top laner and then played in mid. And I think it's always a little dangerous to evaluate those games from the champion's perspective, because unless you've practiced a ton with your top laner playing mid and your mid laner playing top, those are different. They're both solo lanes, but they are quite different. And I think there are comments you have to make about when the Renekton is being played by a top laner in the mid lane, and what's the result? Well, there's a little bit of an asterisk you can put on that one. I think that's also one of the reasons why Renekton is getting picked early, is that it can be used as this flex pick, and flex picks are always really attractive in the draft, right? That combined with the fact that it is a very early kind of lane bully, like shove and dive kind of a champion, skirmishing a lot in international events. You see a lot of this, as we've touched on before. You see a lot of these teams that want to be aggressive and proactive. Early game is the meta of the year. And all of these things kind of work out that on paper it looks like a really great pick, and I agree. I don't think it's a bad pick, but I think it's been a little unlucky in the first couple of days. I think we'll still see plenty of it. Hermes wants to know, what's your predicted trend or champion pick for play-ins that will keep persisting through until the bracket stage?
Trending champion pick.
And put it on the other side. Some things that you think maybe have come up that might go away. We've already talked about the Echo that came in really heavy on day 1, did not perform well, didn't really show up on game 2.
And this is purely for picks that are kind of just coming in, right?
Yeah, I think those are the ones that are worth talking about.
Because you wouldn't say the things that we know, of course, are good. So we probably will keep seeing Pantheon continuing. Though he does have disadvantages, because the pick is purely for early game. He at 25 minutes, he starts doing his damage doesn't really matter as much. You have to have someone to make up for it, and everyone's banned it on red side except for one game, which was against was it Loki? Was it Loki who played Akali into it?
Yeah, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Let's see.
They did play Akali. Yeah.
Yeah, Loki. Yeah, Loki. Yeah, and he got a solo kill. It surprised the Akali player, like Artifact, because again, like his damage when you're at 25% or below is massive. Like he misplayed it a bit, but again, Pantheon has a very specific purpose on how he wants to help his side lanes and like lock down mid lane in the early game. And I assume that's going to continue because you can definitely pick scaling in your top bot. Like you definitely can do that with him. So that would be the first pick for sure. I felt like I would see more Akali, to be honest. I know she lost the stun, and they did like rebuff her R a bit, because she as a whole is still good at giving damage off and for flanks and just almost just kind of being like a scaling pick in mid until 6, and then you play at 6 for mid jungle.
Yeah.
But she wasn't picked at all except for that one game, I think. Oh, and Clutch played it right in the first game.
Yeah, who knew played it?
So I don't think she's really that. Say again?
I was trying to think whether they played it both games. I thought no, it was just the one.
Yeah, and so it seemed like she fell off a bit, but I don't think she's really that bad. And with, I'd assume, better players coming out into the main group stage, that she will come back.
Yeah,
at least that's what I'm hoping.
She's fun to watch too, and I think she can be applied in a lot of different ways. She can be, a backline diver in team fights. She can be a straight up split pusher. She can fill so many different roles, and it can be flexed. I think I enjoy Akali a lot. I also play her a lot in TFT, so that's but that's neither here nor there. What do you think of Qiyana? Because I think we saw Qiyana jungle trying to come in some places, but from what I saw over the last month or so, having really mixed results, not really looking that good. So we did see Qiyana in mid lane. Obviously in North America we're very familiar with Demonte playing it, but also Zhahu was very good at it. Some other people around the world did very well in Qiyana. Do you think Qiyana's going to stick through the tournament as a jungler? Is it going to be around as this mid jungle flex pick, or is the Qiyana jungle a bit of a play-ins thing that's going to go away kind of the next level?
Well, the first 2 games or first 2 days, she has 100% pick ban.
True.
These teams are all scared of her, and her burst damage and her teamfight presence is just so annoying to deal with overall that she probably will stay. Like I can't, like she definitely has counters in mid specifically. Like people will play Renekton into her. We haven't seen any Galio, even though people were saying on Twitter, we're like, oh, Galio's gonna be in Worlds and stuff. As a Galio player myself, that matchup is terrible for Qiyana. Like she literally cannot do anything to it. And I think as long as you can flex it jungle, she will have a higher presence. As long as that team can flex her jungle. I think if she's always played mid, the teams should start being more bold about how they can deal with her. That's my take.
Yeah, I mean it is fairly unique to have the flex pick that can go between a lane and the jungle, right? I mean similarly with like a support versus a laner, maybe even more rare. But often when you see the flex picks, it's between flex between top and mid, or flex between mid and bot, like a Syndra, something like that. I think having this flex that can go in the jungle, where you've got a different balance of what does a counter pick mean in these different roles, right? Like how influential is a counter pick in different roles, and when you can dodge counters in some roles by flexing into something completely different, I think that's always really intriguing in the draft, really valuable. So yeah, I mean, I think I had missed a couple of the Qiyana's being banned just because I mentally skimmed over them. I didn't actually realize she was at 100%, but I think that's a pretty safe bet. She's gonna be around. She's gonna influence the tournament a lot, and those kinds of champions, to see them in the hands of some really skilled junglers and mids is gonna be really exciting to watch.
Yeah, and of course she's just one of those picks that even when she's down 20 CS, she technically has the ability to make a play, even though she's down a lot, more so than other picks, which makes her pretty scary.
Because if it's not about her damage, it can still be about her CC or whatever else, right? Like being able to access a target that maybe some other champions might not be able to access. That's the champions that can play those different roles, and it's not like you have to even build differently or do anything like that, but be influential from ahead, be influential from behind. that's a great spot to be in. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Appreciate you kind of going through the first couple of days, Brendan, with us. We're going to be having more coverage as Worlds rolls out. Next episode will probably be following the round robin, getting ready for the play-in best of fives to see who qualifies through to the main stage. So look forward to that when that comes out. In the meantime, thanks for listening. We'll catch you.